Keira Voss had always known this day would come. When you're a 7-foot-tall warrior with natural armor plating, and the kind of claws that could slice through starship hull, you tend to make enemies. The problem was, she'd made the wrong kind of enemies. The Nexari weren't exactly known for their diplomatic skills. They were more of a solve problems with violence first, ask questions while standing over the corpse kind of species. Keira had been one of their finest warriors, which in Nexari terms meant she could kill things really, really well. But all that changed when she'd settled down to start a family. The clutch chamber deep in her mountain stronghold had been her pride and joy. 12 perfect eggs, each one containing a future warrior that would carry on her bloodline. She'd spent months preparing the chamber, adjusting the temperature, the humidity, the mineral content of the nest. Everything had to be perfect. Then the Dominion came calling. The Dominion were what happened when you took a species that looked like someone had crossed a praying mantis with a particularly aggressive corporate middle manager, gave them a hive mind, and pointed them at the galaxy with instructions to acquire new assets. They didn't just conquer worlds, they harvested them, strip mining entire civilizations for biological material to fuel their expansion. Keira had known they were coming. The outer sensors had picked up their signature energy patterns 3 days ago. She'd tried to evacuate the eggs, but Nexari young needed very specific conditions to survive. Moving them would have killed them just as surely as leaving them. So she'd made her stand. The battle had been everything you'd expect from a Nexari warrior making a last stand. Keira had turned her mountain home into a fortress of death, using every trick she'd learned in 2 centuries of warfare. She'd rigged explosive charges in the tunnels, set up crossfire positions, and prepared enough weapons to arm a small army. For 6 hours she'd held them off. The Dominion had thrown wave after wave of their mantis-like soldiers at her, and she'd cut them down like wheat. The mountain had echoed with the sound of her war cries and the screams of dying Dominion troops. But numbers tell, and the Dominion had numbers to spare. They'd finally broken through her defenses, using a tactic she hadn't expected. They'd simply ignored her. While she was busy defending the main approaches, a small team had tunneled up from below, bypassing her entire defense network. She'd arrived at the clutch chamber just in time to watch them smash the last of her eggs. The rage that had followed was the kind that gets written about in history books. Keira had torn through the Dominion strike team like a natural disaster, her claws rending armor and flesh with equal ease. But it was too late. Her young were gone, reduced to broken shells and scattered genetic material. The Dominion forces that had captured her afterwards had been smart enough to use neural disruptors. Even then, it had taken 30 of them to bring her down, and she'd killed half of them in the process. Now she sat in a Dominion-holding cell, staring at the energy bars that contained her, and contemplated the very specific ways she was going to kill every last member of their species. The Dominion had made a mistake by keeping her alive. They probably thought they could extract information from her, or maybe use her as a breeding specimen for their biological weapons program. They were wrong. The only thing they'd accomplished was ensuring that when she got out, and she would get out, their deaths would be far more creative than they deserved. The cell door chimed, and Keira looked up to see a Dominion guard approaching. Time to see how much punishment these energy bars could take. The Galactic Council chamber was the kind of place that made you feel simultaneously important and completely insignificant. It was a massive sphere floating in the void between stars, with seating for representatives from 3,000 different species. Most of the time it was used for boring trade disputes and the occasional territorial squabble. Today it was full of panic. The Dominion has consumed 14 systems in the past standard month, announced Councillor Zeph Terra, a being that looked like someone had crossed a jellyfish with a particularly anxious bureaucrat. At this rate, they'll reach the core worlds within a year. The various alien representatives buzzed, chittered, and warbled their concerns. Some demanded immediate military action. Others suggested diplomatic solutions. A few of the more cowardly species were already talking about evacuation procedures. Ambassador Marcus Webb sat in Earth's modest little chair in the back row and tried not to laugh. Humanity had only been part of the Galactic Council for about 5 years, and they were still considered the new kids on the block. Most of the other species treated them like an interesting curiosity rather than a serious power. The Dominion is a hive mind, continued Zefterra, his tentacles writhing with distress. They cannot be reasoned with, cannot be bribed, cannot be deterred. They exist only to consume and expand. What about the Nexari? Asked Councillor Vrix, a being that resembled a cross between a rhino and a filing cabinet. They've been fighting the Dominion for decades. The Nexari resistance has been neutralized, Zefterra admitted. Their last stronghold fell 3 days ago. We've lost contact with all their warrior clans. The chamber erupted in worried chatter. The Nexari were legendary fighters, some of the most feared warriors in the galaxy. If they couldn't stop the Dominion, what chance did anyone else have? Perhaps, suggested Councillor Mexon, a bird-like creature with way too many eyes, we should consider a strategic withdrawal to the Outer Rim. Reserve what we can and hope the Dominion eventually burns itself out. Run away? Vrix's mechanical voice crackled with indignation. From insects? Insects that have conquered half the galaxy, Mixin pointed out. Webb cleared his throat. The sound echoed through the chamber's acoustics, drawing attention to Earth's little corner of the proceedings. If I may, he said, standing up slowly. The chamber fell silent. Humans were still something of a novelty, and their contributions to council sessions were usually considered mildly entertaining at best. Earth would be happy to assist with your pest problem, Webb said, his voice carrying the same tone you might use to offer to help a neighbor with their gardening. The silence stretched for a moment. Then Councillor Zefterra's tentacles began to quiver in what might have been laughter. With respect, Ambassador Webb, Earth's military capabilities are limited. Your species has barely achieved faster than light travel. Oh, we don't use the military for pest control, Webb replied, consulting a tablet with the sort of casual air that suggested he was checking his grocery list. We've got specialists for that sort of thing. Specialists? Vrix's optical sensors focused on Webb with something approaching interest. Pest control is a big industry back home, Webb explained. We've got about 8 billion humans on one planet, and we've learned that the best way to deal with an infestation is to call in an expert. Someone who knows how these things think, how they breed, how they spread. Councillor Mixon's feathers ruffled with what might have been amusement. You're suggesting we treat the Dominion like household pests? Well, they are pests, Webb pointed out. They're just bigger than usual. But the principle's the same. You identify the problem, find the source, and eliminate it efficiently. And Earth has someone capable of handling a galactic-level infestation? Zefterra asked, his tone suggesting he was humoring a child. Webb smiled, and there was something in that smile that made several of the nearer councillors suddenly uncomfortable. We've got just the guy. He's dealt with every kind of pest you can imagine. Termites, wasps, cockroaches, ants. He's never met an infestation he couldn't handle. One human? Vrix's voice was flat with disbelief. One human, Webb confirmed. Give us the coordinates of the Dominion's main staging area, and we'll have your problem solved within the week. The chamber erupted in discussion. Some species were outraged by the suggestion. Others were curious. A few were desperate enough to consider it. Councillor Zefterra called for order, his tentacles waving frantically. Ambassador Webb, with all due respect to your species' confidence, the Dominion has defeated the combined fleets of 17 different civilizations. What makes you think one human can succeed where entire armadas have failed? Webb's smile widened slightly. Because, he said, we're really good at killing things that need killing. Jake Morrison was having a perfectly normal Tuesday morning when his phone rang. He was sitting in his van outside the Hendersons' house, mixing up a batch of his special termite treatment, when the call came in. The caller ID just said government. Bug Morrison Pest Control, he answered, wiping his hands on his coveralls. You got bugs, I got solutions. Mr. Morrison, this is Director Patricia Hayes with the Department of Extraterrestrial Affairs. We need to speak with you immediately. Jake blinked. The Department of what now? Extraterrestrial Affairs. We're a classified government agency that deals with off-world situations. Lady, if this is about my taxes, I already told the IRS that van maintenance is a legitimate business expense. Mr. Morrison, we're not calling about taxes. We're calling because Earth has been asked to help resolve a situation in space, and your name came up as our best option. Jake looked at his spray rig, then at the Henderson's house, then back at his spray rig. Are you telling me the government wants to hire me to spray for bugs in space? In a manner of speaking, yes. You can. Huh. Jake considered this. Do they pay better than the Hendersons? 2 hours later, Jake was sitting in a conference room that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd watched too many science fiction movies. There were screens everywhere, holographic displays showing star charts, and enough blinking lights to power a small city. Director Hayes was a stern-looking woman in her 50s who wore the kind of suit that suggested she could have you disappeared without paperwork. She was flanked by a team of people in military uniforms who looked like they weren't sure whether to salute Jake or have him committed. Mr. Morrison, Hayes began, what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. Earth has been part of a galactic community for the past 5 years. We've been keeping this quiet while we assess the situation. Makes sense, Jake said, nodding. No point in panicking, people. Currently, there's a species called the Dominion that's been conquering planets across the galaxy. They're what we might call a hive-mind, operating like a superorganism with millions of individual units all controlled by a central intelligence. Jake perked up. Oh, like ants. Or termites. Yeah, I know how to deal with hive minds. One of the military officers leaned forward. Mr. Morrison, these aren't insects. They're an advanced alien civilization with technology far beyond our own. But they think like insects, right? Jake asked. Hive mind, collective consciousness, follow the Queen's orders? Well, yes, but... Then they're bugs, Jake said with the confidence of someone who'd spent 30 years in pest control. Big bugs, but bugs. Same basic principles apply. Hayes slid a tablet across the table. These are reconnaissance images of Dominion forces. Jake studied the pictures of the mantis like aliens, their biomechanical ships, and their swarming attack patterns. Yep, definitely bugs. Look at that exoskeleton structure. The way they move in formation. Classic hive behavior. What's the environment like where they're nesting? They've taken over a series of asteroid mining facilities, explained another officer. Turned them into breeding and staging areas. Dark, confined spaces with plenty of resources, Jake mused. Perfect for a colony expansion. How long have they been established? About 6 months in their current location. Jake nodded thoughtfully. Then they're vulnerable. Colonies probably still expanding, haven't had time to develop secondary nests. Hit them now, and you can collapse the whole network. Hayes exchanged glances with her team. Mr. Morrison, the Galactic Council has tried everything. Military strikes, biological weapons, even nuclear bombardment. Nothing has worked. Well, sure, Jake said, standing up and stretching. You can't fight a hive mind with conventional tactics. You need to think like an exterminator, not a soldier. Find the Queen, eliminate the pheromone trails, disrupt the breeding cycle. Cut off the head and the body dies. And you think you can do this? Jake picked up his hat and headed for the door. Lady, I once cleared out a wasp colony that had taken over an entire office building. They'd been there for 3 years, driven out 4 different pest control companies. Took me 6 hours. He paused at the door. How soon do you need me to leave? There's a ship waiting for you at the spaceport. Great. I'll need to stop by the van first, pick up my equipment. And I'll need to call the Hendersons, reschedule their appointment. Mr. Morrison, Hayes called after him. You do understand that this is potentially the most dangerous assignment in human history? Jake turned back, and for just a moment there was something in his eyes that made the room full of hardened military officers suddenly very glad he was on their side. I am, he said. I've been killing things for a living for 30 years. Size doesn't matter. Attitude doesn't matter. Intelligence doesn't matter. What matters is understanding how they think, how they live, and how they die. He put on his hat. And I've never met a bug I couldn't figure out. The transport ship that dropped Jake off at the Dominion prison facility was the kind of vessel that made it clear the galaxy took its security seriously. It was basically a flying fortress with enough firepower to level a small moon, operated by a crew of professional soldiers who looked like they'd been bred for warfare. Jake sat in the cargo hold with his equipment cases, wearing the same coveralls he'd put on that morning, and tried not to think about the fact that he was currently traveling through space at speeds that would have made Einstein weep. "Approaching the facility now," announced the ship's captain, a grizzled veteran named Torres who'd been fighting the Dominion for the better part of a decade. "You sure about this plan, Morrison?" Jake checked his spray rig one more time. "Captain, I've been doing this for 30 years. The principles don't change just because the bugs are bigger." The prison facility was a massive asteroid that had been hollowed out and converted into a detention center. It was surrounded by automated defense platforms and patrol ships, all designed to keep the galaxy's most dangerous criminals locked up. The irony wasn't lost on Jake that they were about to break into a prison to recruit someone. "The Nexari warrior is being held in maximum security," Torres explained as they docked. "Keira Voss. She's been in there for 3 days and she's already killed 2 guards and injured 6 others." "Sounds like she's motivated," Jake observed, shouldering his equipment bag. "She's also completely insane with grief and rage," Torres added. "Her entire family was wiped out by the Dominion. She's not exactly in a cooperative mood." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "Makes sense. Nothing more dangerous than something that's got nothing left to lose." The prison's warden, a bureaucratic alien that looked like a cross between a toad and a filing cabinet, met them at the airlock. "I must protest this decision," he wheezed. "The prisoner is extremely dangerous. We've had to keep her in full restraints." "We need someone who knows how the Dominion operates," Jake said, following the warden through corridors lined with energy cells. "Someone who's fought them and survived." "Survived, yes," the warden admitted. "But she's completely unstable. She's been making threats against the entire Dominion species. Very specific, very creative threats." They stopped in front of a cell that hummed with the kind of energy that suggested the occupant was being held by something significantly more powerful than bars. Inside, Jake could see a figure that was easily 7 feet tall, covered in natural armor plating, and possessed of claws that could probably open a can of beans or a human ribcage with equal ease. Keira Voss looked up as they approached, and Jake found himself staring into eyes that burned with the kind of fury that could power a small star. "Another gawker," she growled, her voice carrying the kind of accent that suggested she'd learned galactic standard by beating it out of someone. "Come to see the broken warrior?" "Actually," Jake said, stepping closer to the energy field, "I came to offer you a job." Kira's eyes narrowed. "A job?" "I'm Jake Morrison, and I'm here to exterminate the Dominion. I could use someone with your experience." Keira studied him for a long moment, taking in his coveralls, his equipment bag, and his general air of someone who'd just stepped off a service call. "You're human. Guilty as charged. And you think you can destroy the Dominion?" There was something in her voice that might have been amusement, if amusement could be weaponized. "I think I can solve an infestation problem," Jake replied. "The Dominion's just another hive-mind, bigger than most, but the same basic principles apply." Keira stood up, her full height making it clear that she could probably bench press a small car. "I've spent decades fighting the Dominion. I've studied their tactics, their biology, their psychology. They're not insects, human. They're killers. So are fire ants," Jake pointed out. "Doesn't make them harder to exterminate." "And what makes you think I'd help you?" Kira's claws scraped against the cell walls. "What makes you think I wouldn't just kill you the moment I'm free?" Jake considered this. "Because killing me won't bring back your young. But helping me eliminate the Dominion might prevent other parents from going through what you did." The cell fell silent except for the hum of the energy field. Keira stared at Jake with the kind of intensity that suggested she was trying to decide whether he was brave, stupid, or both. You have a plan? She asked finally. I have a strategy. Find the queen, disrupt the colony structure, eliminate the breeding cycle. Standard pest control protocol. The Dominion doesn't have a queen, Keira said flatly. Everything has a queen, Jake replied. Maybe they call it something else, maybe it's not biological. But there's always a central control mechanism. Find it, and you can collapse the entire network. Keira was quiet for another moment. Then she began to laugh. It was not a pleasant sound. You're either the bravest human I've ever met, or the most foolish. Probably both, Jake admitted. But I'm also really good at killing bugs. The Dominion took everything from me, Keira said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow managed to be more terrifying than her earlier rage. My young, my clan, my purpose. If you can give me a chance to return the favor, I'll follow you into the depths of space itself. Jake nodded. Warden, I'll need her restraints removed. Absolutely not, the warden protested. She's far too dangerous to. She's also our best chance of stopping the Dominion, Jake interrupted. And something tells me she's got a pretty good reason to cooperate. The energy field flickered and died, and Keira Voss stepped out of her cell like a natural disaster taking human form. She towered over Jake, her claws gleaming in the corridor lights, and for a moment everyone present held their breath. Then she knelt down, bringing herself to Jake's eye level, and extended one massive, clawed hand. Partners? Nah. Jake shook it, noting that she was careful not to puncture his skin with her claws. Partners. Now let's go kill some bugs. The Dominion mothership was exactly what Jake had expected. A massive, organic-looking structure that resembled a cross between a space station and a very angry wasp nest. It was surrounded by smaller ships that moved in perfect formation, their biomechanical hulls gleaming with the kind of unnatural sheen that suggested they were more grown than built. 30,000 individual units, Keira reported, studying the tactical display. Plus support vessels, automated defenses, and enough firepower to sterilize a planet. Jake nodded, checking his equipment one more time. He'd modified his spray rig for space operations, adding a few items that weren't typically part of standard pest control equipment. How long has this colony been established? 6 months, as your intelligence suggested. They've been using it as a staging area for their expansion into the core systems. Perfect, Jake said, sealing his helmet. Colony's still young, still centralizing. Command structure should be concentrated in the core sections. Their approach ship was a small, stealthy vessel that had been designed for covert operations. It could slip past most sensor networks, and its hull was coated with materials that made it invisible to biological detection systems. I still don't understand your plan, Keira said as they approached the mothership's outer hull. How do you expect to eliminate 30,000 Dominion units with pest control equipment? Jake patted one of his equipment cases. Same way I'd eliminate 30,000 termites. You don't fight them one at a time. You find the source, introduce a systemic solution, and let biology do the work. They docked with the mothership through what appeared to be a maintenance port, the kind of small, overlooked opening that every large structure had. Jake had learned long ago that the best way to get into a building was to look like you belonged there. The interior of the ship was a maze of organic corridors that pulsed with their own light. The walls were covered in a substance that looked like a cross between chitin and circuitry, and the air was filled with the kind of low-frequency humming that suggested massive machinery operating just beyond the range of human hearing. Definitely a hive structure, Jake observed, consulting a small device that looked like a modified moisture meter. Look at these pheromone concentrations. They're using chemical communication to coordinate movement. The Dominion don't use pheromones, Keira said, her voice puzzled. Everything uses pheromones, Jake replied, following the readings deeper into the ship. Maybe they call it something else, maybe it's electromagnetic or quantum or whatever, but there's always a communication system. Find it, and you can disrupt it. They moved through the corridors with practiced stealth, Keira's warrior training combining with Jake's 30 years of sneaking into buildings to deal with pest problems. They encountered several Dominion units along the way, but Jake's approach was simple. Avoid them if possible. Eliminate them quietly if necessary. You move like a soldier, Keira observed after Jake had disabled a patrol unit with what appeared to be a modified insecticide sprayer. I move like someone who's spent 3 decades getting into places where I'm not wanted, Jake corrected. You learn to be quiet when you're trying to get to a wasp nest without getting stung. The deeper they went into the ship, the more obvious it became that Jake's analysis was correct. The Dominion had organized their mothership exactly like a hive, with specialized areas for different functions, nurseries for growing new units, workshops for maintaining equipment, and a central command structure that coordinated everything. The Queen's chamber, Keira breathed as they approached a massive central space that thrummed with energy. Queen, Central Processing Unit, whatever they want to call it, Jake said, unsealing his main equipment case. Inside was a device that looked like a cross between a crop duster and a small nuclear reactor. Time to introduce a little chaos into their system. What is that thing? Custom solution, Jake said, beginning to set up the device. I've been working on it for years. It's designed to disrupt the chemical communication systems that social insects use to coordinate their behavior. But the Dominion aren't insects, Keira protested. They act like insects, Jake replied, making final adjustments to the device. They organize like insects, they communicate like insects, they think like insects. Maybe they're not technically insects, but they're close enough. The device began to hum, and Jake stepped back with the satisfaction of someone who'd just solved a particularly difficult problem. This is going to introduce a synthetic pheromone analog into their communication system. It'll basically tell every unit in the hive that the colony is under attack from all directions simultaneously. And that will do what? Jake smiled, and there was something in that smile that made Keira understand why Earth had sent this particular human to deal with their pest problem. It'll make them panic. And when a hive mind panics, it makes mistakes. Big ones. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Alarms began blaring throughout the ship, and the corridor lights shifted from their normal organic glow to a harsh, strobing red. The sound of running feet echoed from every direction as Dominion units began responding to threats that existed only in their disrupted communication system. They're fighting each other, Keira observed, watching through a viewport as Dominion units began attacking anything that moved. Chaos, Jake said with professional satisfaction. When you disrupt a hive mind's communication system, the individual units start operating on instinct instead of coordination. And their instincts are telling them that everything is a threat. Within minutes, the organized efficiency of the Dominion colony had collapsed into complete pandemonium. Units were attacking each other, equipment was being destroyed, and the ship's systems were beginning to fail as panicked operators made increasingly desperate decisions. We should go, Jake said, packing up his equipment. This place is going to tear itself apart. They made their way back through corridors that were now filled with the sounds of a civilization destroying itself. Dominion units ran past them without even noticing, too busy fighting imaginary enemies to pay attention to the 2 actual intruders. 30 years of pest control, Jake said as they reached their ship. And I've learned one thing: the bigger they are, the harder they fall, especially when they fall apart from the inside. The Galactic Council chamber was significantly quieter than it had been during the emergency session. Most of the representatives sat in stunned silence, watching the tactical displays that showed the complete collapse of the Dominion fleet. 17 hours, Councillor Zephtera said, his tentacles hanging limp with disbelief. The humans solved a problem that had plagued us for decades in 17 hours. Ambassador Webb sat in Earth's chair, looking like someone who'd just won a bet he'd never expected to collect on. Jake's efficient. He doesn't like to waste time. The entire Dominion fleet has been neutralized, reported the Council's military advisor. Their ships are dead in space, their colonies are collapsing, and their surviving units are attacking each other. It's the most complete military defeat in recorded galactic history. And he did it with bug spray, Councillor Vreekrex added, his mechanical voice carrying what might have been awe. Pest control equipment, Webb corrected. There's a difference. On the main display, the tactical situation continued to update in real time. The Dominion mothership had been the first to fall, tearing itself apart from the inside as its crew descended into chaos. The effect had spread to the rest of the fleet through their communication networks, creating a cascade failure that had rendered the entire invasion force helpless within hours. "How is this possible?" asked Counselor Mixon, her feathers ruffled with confusion. "The Dominion was an advanced civilization. They had technology we could barely comprehend." "They were bugs," Webb said simply. "Advanced bugs, but bugs nonetheless. And humans have been dealing with bugs for a very long time." The chamber's main screen shifted to show a live feed from the prison facility where Jake and Keira had returned after their mission. Jake was sitting in the facility's cafeteria, eating what appeared to be a sandwich and filling out paperwork. Keira sat across from him, looking like someone who'd just discovered that the universe was far stranger than she'd ever imagined. "Mr. Morrison," came Director Hayes' voice over the communication link, "the Galactic Council would like to offer you a position as Director of Pest Management for the entire galaxy." Jake looked up from his sandwich. "That's nice, but I've already got a job. Mrs. Henderson's been calling all week about her ant problem." "Mr. Morrison, we're talking about a position that would make you one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy." "Lady, I've been in pest control for 30 years. I've seen power. And I've seen what happens when people get too much of it. Usually ends up with someone calling me to clean up the mess." He took another bite of his sandwich. "Besides, I like my route. Good customers, steady work, and I get to sleep in my own bed." Keira leaned forward. "What about the other pest problems? The galaxy is full of species that could become threats." Jake considered this. "Well, I suppose I could take the occasional consultation, long as it doesn't interfere with my regular schedule." "You'd be willing to help with future infestations?" Webb asked. "Sure, but I'll need to hire some help. Can't cover the whole galaxy by myself." Jake looked at Keira. "You interested in a career change?" Kira's laugh was completely different from the sound she'd made in her cell. This one was full of genuine amusement. "You want me to become an exterminator?" "I want you to become a specialist. Someone who understands how dangerous pests think, how they operate, how they can be stopped. You've got the experience and you've got the motivation." "Morrison Pest Control, Galactic Division," Keira mused. "I like the sound of that." "We'll start you off easy," Jake said. "There's a species called the Vectar that's been causing problems in the Outer Rim. They're basically space locusts. Should be a good training mission." 3 months later, Jake was back in his van, driving through his regular route in suburban Ohio. His spray equipment had been upgraded with a few modifications that weren't standard issue, and his phone now had a contact list that included several alien species. But otherwise everything was pretty much the same. His phone rang as he was pulling up to the Hendersons' house. "Morrison Pest Control, this is Jake." "Mr. Morrison, this is Keira. We've got a situation developing in the Andromeda sector. Something that looks like a cross between a spider and a battleship." Jake sighed and put the van in park. "Hive-mind or individual hunters?" "Hive-mind. They're building nests in asteroid fields and launching coordinated attacks on shipping lanes." "Okay, that's definitely a pest problem. What's the timeline?" "The Galactic Council is requesting immediate assistance. They're offering to pay triple rates." Jake looked at the Hendersons' house, then at his schedule, then at the small device on his dashboard that could connect him to anywhere in the galaxy. "Tell them I'll be there Tuesday. And Keira, pack the heavy-duty equipment. Already loaded. See you at the spaceport." Jake hung up, grabbed his regular spray rig, and headed for the Hendersons' front door. The universe might be full of dangerous pests that needed professional attention, but he still had a route to finish. After all, good customer service was good customer service, whether you were dealing with ants in Ohio or alien invasions in the Andromeda sector. Some things never changed.